Great stuff. It's a minute ago, Steve, for us to start with our webinar.
Okay.
And maybe I can pass over to you. First, those of you that are signing in, apologies, we were stumbling along here this morning, the last 20 minutes trying to configure internet setup because Eskom here in Cape Town, where we are, has let us down with the unexpected electricity failure.
Yeah.
But we are live and reaching people. We have quite a few people signing in right now. And we've got our two guests online. My name is Christoph Oosthuizen, and I'll leave it to Steve to take it from here. I'll push the buttons to make sure, Steve, that we stay as far as we can. We stay live.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for making it to this webinar today. I think it's this event is actually very auspicious, and I think for the obvious reason. I know that over there in Cairo, AfreximBank is very busy with this. I wouldn't call it an Africa event. I think it's a global event. Even though it is an intra-African trade fair, I see that Cairo will be receiving a lot of visitors in the next few days. So I think I would like to start by actually congratulating and appreciating Ms. Kanayo for the initiative and for this Pan-African vision. It's one of the things that personally excites me to see Africa, moving forward. And it's one of the reasons why I personally actually align some of my business ideals with whatever it is that embraces Pan-Africa. And I think we really appreciate you. My team here in Cape Town are actually very excited, with what you and your team are doing over there. So you are welcome. So my brother Sakile, we are missing you at home. So I hope you are enjoying Accra over there. Yeah, so welcome on board. I'm very, very sure that we are going to have a very lovely time today to really be in a position whereby we can look at these issues. Because of the nature of what I do, what the kind of questions and the conversation that people try to engage with me is about this issue of, corporate versus small businesses. And as we all know, Africa is in a phase now whereby we just need to look for a way to address some of our present challenges. Some of this is job creation. And we came up with this idea to actually specifically focus on how will some of these good policies and initiatives at the AU level, at the level of AfreximBank, how will this thing now come to the level of, let's say, small businesses? So we want to try to downscale our discussion a little bit to be able to really focus on how do these things translate into actually helping the real people on the ground in terms of, value chain beneficiation, trying to see how we can connect the dots to make sure that policy at the bottom level, at the top level, is able to actually impact people at the kind of a bottom. The meeting between bottom-up and top-down approaches. So that's the reason for this conference, and I'm looking forward to this engagement. And we will try as much as possible to make it very interactive. Okay, now we go into it. Now, a little bit about AfreximBank. I think I told people who have sent me email to ask about AfreximBank. Is it a new bank and all that? I think the first impression the first response I gave them, have you Googled them? And I tell them, go and Google them. They've been around for quite a while, and they are actually doing a lot. And most people don't really know about the bank. I think this is a very, very good opportunity for AfreximBank, Ms. Kanayo, to really be able to educate our people about what the bank represents and how the bank is actually a Pan-African bank that is actually ready to fulfill its mandate towards seeing how economic progress can actually benefit Africa. So we want to actually unpack that. And I think one other thing that is trending now is the issue of intra-African trade fair, which I would want her to also educate us. Somebody was asking me, why do we need intra-African trade fair? What is going to be the benefit thereof? Is it going to be another talk shop if it's not going to translate to what actually Africa needs now? So we want to also try to engage that. And then, Ms. Kanayo is actually the director currently now in charge of Intra-African Trade Initiative at the bank, which of course, I think for me, it's very important for us to stress the fact that the thing we encourage at Basilia Group, which is my company, is to see how African countries can begin to do businesses with one another. This is what we've been promoting the last 3 years on our platform for conferences. And I think this is very important because this is where, you know, in terms of social, apart from the social cohesion benefit that is in that, we also see economic benefits. And but we know that there are constraints. So, but we are happy that the African Continental Free Trade Zone Agreement, we do a lot to really address some of those constraints. So you are welcome to the program. And for Sakile, my brother, I think we live in an age now where entrepreneurs are actually, I wouldn't say they are trending. So, but I think every now and then you hear topics being said about issues being discussed about entrepreneurs and all that. It will be good for us to know how your platform, your agency is actually, you know, assisting entrepreneurs. The kind of what you do at HWeb, I think, is what Africa needs. And I think this platform is a platform for us to actually unpack some of those things and to see how we can connect the dots to really take this thing forward. I'm excited, very excited, Christophe, that we are talking about it for Africa.
So before we get to the topic, I must just, those that are online, you're going to speak a bit about the website and the upcoming conference and so on, things that are going to follow after the webinar.
Yes.
So this is not really, and Steve and myself met here in Cape Town, but we born Africans that are wanting to make a difference in getting entrepreneurs and small businesses specifically to grow, so they create jobs, so that we can see the economy of our countries growing.
Yeah.
But working with people that want to make a difference, you know, sort of not the entrepreneurs that are sitting there on their side and, you know, just want to see things happening by itself, but people that want to make a thing different. So if you count amongst those, whether you're an entrepreneur or someone supporting entrepreneurs, then this is the right place. And I must say, I'm very excited to hear from Ms. Kanayo and from, I'm not sure what you call you, Sakile, Mr. Gulu. But we can keep it maybe here today. About this great new step that's been taken with the free trade and the countries that are in and those that are about to join and so on, and what the impact that is going to be on us as small businesses and entrepreneurs. So, but I'll leave that to you to take us through and guide with our guests.
Okay, great. So I think I'd like to begin with AfreximBank, Ms. Kanayo, to just try to tell us a little bit about the upcoming trade fair, and as well as what our department has been up to. You're welcome. You're welcome. Glad to have you.
Thank you, and good morning. Thank you, and this is to express my thanks to Steve. We've been engaging for quite a bit, and the Basilia Group for setting this up. And it's also greetings to Mr. Zulu for being a co-presenter, and to the audience as well. We really value the moment in the sense that it is timely for us as we're trying to get people to Cairo to attend the very first of its kind Intra-African Trade Fair that will be coming up in between the December 11th and 17th. But before I jump into the bank, the trade fair, permit me to talk a little bit about AfreximBank, since we always like to use that opportunity. And I'm mindful, as you said, Steve, yourself, that many people may not have heard of AfreximBank, especially in South Africa, which is which only joined the bank, you know, in probably about a year ago, although we've been trying to do business because we have some private sector shareholders. The bank is a Pan-African, it's called African Export-Import Bank. And just before I go on, let me introduce myself properly. My name is Kanayo Awani. And I'm the managing director for the bank's Intra-African Trade Initiative. In 2015, the bank conceived a new strategy, which I'll talk about later, which a strategy that is anchored around intra-African trade. But the bank itself is a Pan-African multilateral organization, established in 1993 under the auspices of the African Development Bank. So in 1993, the African Development Bank said, you know, it would be good to have a trade finance bank. And at that time, it was to deal with things that we begin to see that are counter-cyclical, and that is financing gaps or recession or crisis in our economies. And so let's have a bank that will deal with trade finance. In the last few years, we have seen that kind of situation where due to commodity price shocks, African countries have suffered in terms of revenues, especially the commodity dependent ones that are less diversified. So what happens, as you'll often see, is that when there is a shock, even though Africa is, for instance, the greatest producer or the largest producer of cocoa in the world, with 70% of its cocoa coming from 4 African countries. But what will happen is that whenever there is a shock in price, that affects the producer of cocoa, who is doing it at a primary level. Those shocks never affect the price of chocolates. And and when those things happen, the countries in Africa begin to suffer, and finance and capital begin to retreat. Those international banks will call it de-risking, and they thought, okay, it's about time we set up our own institution that will deal with these challenges. And that's what happened, such that even when it happened a few years ago, AfreximBank stepped up to support and create a buffer for those trade lines that were being affected, or those trade backlog that could not be paid due to the shortage of foreign exchange in those countries to deal with those. So we supported Nigeria, Egypt, Ghana, and some of the other countries that were affected primarily, by oil and gas, crude oil shortage. So that was the thinking behind African Development Bank setting up the bank. It's 25 years old now. We have a balance sheet size, total assets that is in excess of $11 billion. Our primary head office we operate out of Cairo, although we have branch offices in Nigeria, Harare, Ivory Coast, and one that is going to come up soon in East Africa. Our mandate is to promote intra and extra-African trade, and we intervene using 3 broad instruments, which are credits. So under credit, we give trade and project finance. The second is risk-bearing instruments, whereby we give guarantees. And the third is trade information and advisory services. I'll just talk a little bit about our current strategy that I had already alluded to. Our current strategy is tagged, and please stop me if you want me to stop talking and there are questions to come. It's tagged, we called it Impact 2021, Africa Transformed. It will run between 2017 and 2021. We call it Impact 2021, Africa Transformed. I said that for emphasis, and that's because we're serious about transforming this continent. We decided to, some of the initiatives you'll hear me talk about are heavy lifting, because we thought to ourselves, and one of those heavy lifting initiatives is the trade fair. If not us, who? And if not now, when? So the strategy is hinged on 4 pillars, but I'll talk about 3 because the 4th one is internal to us. It's intra-African trade. Promoting intra-African trade is the main, and that's the arrowhead of this strategy. The second one is to facilitate export development through industrialization and export manufacturing. And the third is to strengthen the bank's leadership, trade finance leadership, or leadership in trade finance. And I'll just talk a little bit briefly about starting with leadership in trade finance. I just mentioned that when there's a crisis, a lot of international banks will retreat. We will decide to step up our game, and we will provide trade finance and increase our trade financing solutions. For instance, we never used to issue letters of credit. However, we provide confirmation facilities, right? And that's because that was the need at the time, to provide confirmation, discount of LCs and what have you. Right now, we decided to start issuing letters of credit. We never used to do factoring services. Factoring is something that those in South Africa will be familiar with. Today, we only support it on a wholesale basis, where we'll give lines of credit to factoring companies. And that's stuff like this, talk to SMEs, by the way. But right now, we've decided to start doing factoring and become a factor. We now do it for faithing, providing supporting alternative means of trade financing, just so that we try and contribute to bridging the gap in trade finance. Export development is the obvious one, and industrialization. Unless our continents begin to transform, and move away from primary commodities and and diversified economies, will continue to be susceptible to shocks of commodities, as I already mentioned. So we're trying to promote in an active way, in a significant way, industrialization. And if I just may talk about some of the initiatives we have under industrialization. We're actively supporting the development of industrial parks. The reason we're doing that is because industrial parks attend to deficiencies in infrastructure and such that under a park model, industrial park model, even the SMEs we talk about can come in and plug and play. So we're actively doing that. And we're not just doing that because we want to provide project finance. We're actually doing an equity play in industrial parks. That's, we're supporting actively the promotion of testing, inspection, and certification centers. And that essentially is to deal with issues associated with rejection of shipments outside of Africa just because of standards and certification issues. So we're supporting that. So we're building labs. We're actually in the process of constructing our own labs. If you're able to come into Cairo for the trade fair, you'll see models of the labs or even industrial parks that are under development. And then I will spend a little bit more time on Intra-African trade strategy. The Intra-African trade strategy is an avenue to promote industrialization as well. It was important that we did it to promote Intra-African. Let me tell you why. There is no shortage of markets for Africa's primary commodities. Africa's gold and diamonds and cocoa will always have a market in their primary form. But we need to say no to that and begin to support value addition. So long as we're in supporting, we remain as primary commodity producers or primary natural resources state, then, we cannot sell to ourselves. What's the point of South Africa, Sudan, and Ghana selling gold to each other if none of them can refine and add value? What's the point of Nigeria, Ghana, and Ivory Coast selling cocoa to themselves if there is no value addition? They can't. So all the capacities outside of the continent, and then we're exporting the jobs. Value addition is where you have to be. It will help our export capacities. It will help our earnings, as it were. It will create jobs. It will stop Africans, our youths, our women, from dying in the Mediterranean seas and being sold as slaves elsewhere in Africa. We must begin to add value, and that's what Intra-African trade, it gives us an unprecedented opportunity to industrialize and to sell to one another. What's the point that Kenya needs raw hide and it goes to buy it from New Zealand when Burundi sells it? What's the point that Ethiopia buys cotton, from Asia when Egypt sells one of the best quality cotton in the world? So we had to focus on intra-African trade. And that's why we said we made it the arrowhead of our strategy. It's conceptualized around two, and I'm sure people will sometimes ask me, but there's so many problems with intra-African trade. But that's why we conceptualize that along two lines of businesses. One is finance, intra-African trade finance, which is actually the easy one. The other one is intra-African trade facilitation to deal with those bottlenecks associated with intra-African trade. We have in our own defined intra-African trade as trading goods and services between and amongst African countries, or between trading goods and flow of goods and services between Africa and Africans in diaspora.
Can I ask a question? Okay. Thank you so much. I just feel like you should just continue. Yeah. That's mouthful. Thank you. Now, I just want to find out, I think, are there legislations that actually, when it comes to Afrexim, doing business with the member countries, are there some policies and legislation in place that actually stipulate the kind of businesses that you can do with those countries? And also, you mentioned something very important, which is the issue of value chain, because that's actually my area of specialization. I know that the jobs are within the value chain.
Yes.
If we can get the value chain right, then the issue of job and jobless youth and all that will be drastically reduced. So I just want to know whether there are legislations and policies that encourage that to happen. Because I think what we need to do now is that in practical terms, what are those things that member countries affiliated to AfreximBank, what are they doing to unlock this opportunity that your platform provides? Especially, I would like to know, which of course I think is also the thinking of most of the audience, how will this opportunity translate to assisting small businesses, especially in the area of industrialization and upscaling their businesses? If you can throw more light on that, please.
Well, in terms of because we're a policy bank, I didn't talk about our shareholding, which suggests that, the main shareholders, we have 4 classes of shareholders, the main being the African governments. And it's African governments through their central banks in some cases, or the federal, or rather their treasury, which is the Ministry of Finance or Department of Finance or what have you. In some cases, in some countries, it is both. Like in Nigeria, it is both the central bank and the Ministry of Finance. And in some cases, it is through their parastatals. Like in South Africa, it is through the ECIC. So it can be any form. We will do business in any of our member states, and there are 50 of them right now. So it's most of Africa, right? There are 50, so we'll do business. We have all sorts of interventions and products and facilities to support businesses across Africa. We are not necessarily, unlike ADB, we're not necessarily a public sector bank. We are actually more focused on the private sector, including the SMEs you talk about. However, we still do business with governments.
Okay.
Right.
Let me give you an instance. Okay. Sorry, that's a very good point you made there. And yes. I think it boils down to what someone within our network was asking in an email to me, saying that, will you please find out from your guest, how is African Development Bank different from AfreximBank? Are they duplicating roles? I think it would be good to use this platform to fine-tune that, to really throw light. What is it that AfreximBank is doing that African Development Bank is not doing on the continent? These are 2 big banks. So are there duplication of roles, or are there clearly defined roles that these 2 big banks play on the continent?
There could be overlaps, but largely speaking, the African Development Bank, which is a bigger bank, is more involved in government financing and heavy infrastructure. First of all, their financing tenure is much longer. The kind of tickets they do probably much bigger because of the balance sheet side. They're more focused on government. You hear things about Paris Club lending, and we don't do all of that. We don't do concessional loans either. They also do grants. We don't do grants. That's why I was saying that we are private sector. We are more into trade finance and trade enabling infrastructure. So there's some heavy infrastructure projects that we will not do. So they're more focused on government, and they do deals that are tied to the fiscus, to the government budget. We are more focused on trade finance transactions that we can follow the cash and the trade. And then we can also do smaller tickets, and then our tenure is 7 years maximum.
Oh, great.
Right.
Great.
So that's basically it.
Okay, now I just want to find out, before I actually give the floor to Sakile in Accra to talk, I want to ask you, madam, what is the priority of AfreximBank when it comes to agribusiness and the value chain development within the agri sector? Because you said something during your introduction, or the presentation, should I call it presentation?
Yes.
That you mentioned the issue of chocolate. Like where you see that the main product is from Africa, but elsewhere outside the continent, is being repackaged and sold back to us and all that. I think it would be good to know what is to know the focus of the bank when it comes to agriculture and agribusiness, because that is very massive for the continent.
Okay, and by the way, before I answer that question, will I have an opportunity to talk about the trade fair?
Yes, you will. Yes, you will.
Okay.
You can just, okay.
Our entire strategy is focused on two main sectors: agriculture and agribusiness, and light manufacturers. I hope that answers your question. The strategy, all the strategy I talked about in 2021, Transforming Africa, is anchored on largely on agriculture and agribusinesses and the value chains associated with it, obviously adding value, and light manufacturers. But also there are other elements that we need to capitalize on. For instance, Africa's creative economy, which is something we have you upon, and a diaspora initiative. So I hope that answers the question.
Okay, great. So you can say something about the
so I just wanted to maybe engage some of the people that are in the audience. We've got a good attendance here. Okay. So Lulu, Edmilson, Doro, Noel, Tobekile, sort of welcome, guys. We can make this webinar format quite participative. Maybe we're also finding our feet in terms of where we're going with this. But if you, as participants, look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see there's a button that says chat. And if you click on that, you can, in fact, participate in the discussion by typing in there. So maybe we can just start off by typing. If you have a question there that you would like to ask, or if there's a thought that you would like to share about how we, in our different ways, can contribute towards increase inter-Africa trade, then you should please do so. So if you have a question that you want to ask, or if you have a thought that you would like to share, you should feel welcome to do so. So may I ask, Doro, Lulu, can you just type there that we can see that it's working? Can you just say hi to us? Okay. Or maybe Patrice. Or Carl or Anthea. Okay. You can type it. There's Lulu saying hi. And
you see them now. Thank you guys. We can see all of you now. Oh, great. So I think let's give Madam the time to really talk about the Inter-African Trade Fair happening. It's a big event for the continent. We are all excited. Let's hear from you.
One of the things that is militating against, the intra-African trade is very low. Some statistics put it at 15%, others at 17%, and what have you. Whatever the case, 15%, it is too low. It just means that most of our exports, as I already mentioned to you, is exported outside of Africa, and for reasons we know why. If intra-Africa trade is because of we're selling primary commodities. For it to grow, we have to, close the gap. But one of the issues why intra-African trade is not growing, although there is a huge level of informal trade, is the fact that there is a huge information gap on where to buy your goods, where to source raw materials, what the markets are. So there is weak or lack of trade and market information, even weak and lack of investments, opportunities, information. That's one of the major gaps we want to close through the trade fair. And to begin to connect, I mentioned earlier about the Kenyan buyer of rawhide who has to go to New Zealand where the Burundi sells it, is to begin to create, connect buyers and sellers and begin to build and create trade and market information such that we can deal with that bottleneck. So this is the very first of its kind, but it's a very unique kind of fair, and it's one of those things that shifts us away from talking. It is one of the instruments to implement the Continental Free Trade Agreement, which is right now a political, this is a political will, but you have to translate it into action. And that's what we try to do. When we say we do heavy lifting, it's not our job as a bank to do a trade fair. You can just imagine yourself, why is the bank doing it? But somebody has to do it, and why not us? So it has 4 components. It's an exhibition, a trade show. People are invited. We have today almost 1,100 exhibitors coming from all of Africa under one space. So it's a trade show, people coming to show. Even we have over 40 countries. Some of them are just coming with their SMEs to talk to your points. They're subsidizing and bringing their SMEs. Some of them are coming to showcase, and I'm now talking about countries, showcase their investment opportunities, cultural tourism opportunities. And then there are the independent exhibitors who want to showcase their wares, goods, services, as well as investment opportunities. There is the B2Bs, which is what we're talking about, a platform for buyers and sellers, private and government entities. They can meet and close deals because we are committed to closing deals. That's why we have a target of $25 billion, you know, as a target to close deals there. And we're also committed to financing them, by the way, to at least reviewing the transactions or the deals that are closed. So if we want to, you very soon, you may have seen some of our press releases asking people to bring their deals, you know, to come and bring them to the AfreximBank pavilion or AfreximBank deal processing center at the pavilion so that we can look at your deals. There is also a conference.
Okay.
And that means that there's a conference program running alongside it where we will discuss issues that are associated. There's going to be a high-level roundtable of heads of states and ministers of trade conference that is holding on the sidelines of the trade fair. Issues around payments and settlements, issues around the harmonization of our standards across Africa, the creative sector economy, and then finally there is a virtual trade fair. So if you cannot attend physically, you have an opportunity to showcase your wares, your goods, your services on a virtual trade fair.
Okay.
So it's holding between December 11th and 17th at the Cairo International Exhibition Center and the Al Manara Conference Center. It's one venue of a conference center and a huge 17,000 square meters of exhibition space that is fully booked today.
Wow, that's great. So thank you so much. I think it would be good if you could give us our people want to know the website. And for us on our platform at Basilia, we want to use our platform to tweeting. Some people are actually traveling from South Africa to attend the conference, but for those who will not be able to go, we'd like to try and monitor this event. If you can give our audience the website to go, unique hashtag that people can use on Twitter to promote this event. As much as this is a Pan-African event, we are excited. We see ourselves as an integral part of what is happening in Cairo. So we are saying to all the people all over Africa listening on this webinar now, to say that wherever you are, get your pen and paper, write down the hashtag and the website, visit and promote it widely on your platform. That is the whole essence of this. So let's hear from you, the website and the unique hashtag that you are using.
Thank you very much. And I tend to talk passionately about this. It is a Pan-African Intra-African trade fair, but it is open to non-Africans who have interest in doing Africa. You think about it, especially those who are promoting investment goods. Yeah, so the Africans does not produce aircrafts, but you probably need aircraft producers to come and exhibit their wares so that the Africans saw. So we had a huge delegation from outside of Africa, from countries like Indonesia, Russia, China, the UK. And the website is www.intraafricantradefair.com. And a hashtag, Twitter and social media, you know, addresses is hashtag IATF 2018, you know, and that's it. You know, we'll appreciate. We thank you very much to see how much promotion you can do for us, Steve, and the Brazilian group.
So yeah, I think we quickly want to move to Accra now. Yeah, yes. we spent ample time there in Cairo. So let's visit Accra quickly and hear what our brother Sakile have to say to us there. Sakile, over to you.
Okay. So of Kisima Audio Insights, but I also work for.
Sakile, you were muted there for a moment still, so.
Sure.
If you can start from the top, please.
Okay. No problem.
So maybe with an introduction of yourself and the ideas of intra-African trade is, of course, the topic of discussion today.
Yeah,
sure. Yeah, so my name is Sakile Kulu. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Kisima Audio Insights. but more importantly, I also work for the HWeb. And so I work most closely with Christoph from the foundation side. And what we do is, I would call us bottom of the pyramid or grassroots venture capital fund. And the most important thing to us is capacity building of entrepreneurs, right? Because what we've learned over the past couple of years, I work closely with most of the ecosystems across the continent. And what I've learned is that even if you give entrepreneurs money, you give them capital, most cases, they are not literate in terms of the use of capital, right? So, and the most important thing is if you give someone capital is the capacity building around how they use the capital, right? So I think the HWeb fund and the foundation focuses on that, is how can we build the capacity of the entrepreneur, but then also facilitate their growth through investment in their businesses, right? So the HWeb invests in startups across the continent. South Africa, they also just invested in my startup, Kisimo Audio Insights, based out of Ghana, but we're also now launching into South Africa as well. And so, yeah, so most important thing to us is capacity building, helping entrepreneurs grow through the foundation, right? So how do we sponsor people who work around the ecosystem through the foundation to help entrepreneurs grow? And the benefits that I see with this agreement more than anything is, firstly, it will help with the movement of people and goods, right? Because I travel a lot. Probably my airfare in terms of traveling the continent per year is around about $40,000. And it's more expensive for me to travel to any other African country for me to travel to Europe. For example, my ticket to Austria, I think sometime next month, it's far cheaper than my ticket to Accra, from Accra to Johannesburg, right? So that's the first thing, is how do we democratize travel, right? So it makes it easier for goods and people to travel across the continent. So once we get that right, I think what will happen is we'll start seeing industries pop up. One of the things that I'm excited about, I actually attended an event here in South Africa about a couple of months ago, where they were planning some SADC rail, freight rail, for goods and services. And if you get a rail or freight rail trail track around across the continent, what will happen is wherever there's a railroad, what happens is infrastructure projects begin to pop up. And so these are the most important things with these agreements, is how do we then facilitate the growth of the continent? How do we facilitate the growth of young entrepreneurs through this? But for me, is I see, like the woman said, the agreement is political will, but the implementation of the agreement is the most important thing. How is this agreement going to be implemented, right? Because for me, the most important thing is, as an entrepreneur, even if I have capital, even if I have capacity, it's all about how conducive the environment is for the growth of the entrepreneur. And I think what I've learned is it's legislation, right? One of my first businesses that I founded was here in South Africa. And because of legislation, or the lack thereof of legislation, the business failed, right? Because we were in the business of IT infrastructure development. And most of the time we found ourselves, every contract that we were bidding for, going against some of the biggest companies in the country. And of course, if you're bidding against a BCX, for example, you can't compete if there's no, for example, legislation that tells BCX in terms of procurement to purchase from maybe 5% should be from small businesses, right? But BCX procurement directive has nothing to say about them purchasing from smaller businesses. It just says they should purchase maybe 20% of their procurement budget locally. But if there's something that will speak to the diversity of procurement, that means if we then have right investment being channeled, or supply chain being channeled into startups, or integrating startups into supply chains of big businesses. And I think that's how we grow businesses, and that's how we grow entrepreneurship, is how do we plug in businesses into existing supply chains, for example. And so one of my things that I've been doing is I have a small consultancy on the side where that's the main focus, is how do I work with businesses and channel them through basically supply chains of businesses, because that's sustainable. That's sustainable growth. If I plug you into a sustainable supply chain, for example, I plug a business like mine with MTN, and then I'm able to do business with MTN on a continuous basis, then for me to raise investment, for example.
Great. Thank you so much, Sakile. I think what you are saying is actually very much on point. And you see, at Basilia, is one of the things we are trying to do is to get more people like yourself and AfreximBank together. We are having a conference in 4 countries in 2019, which I'm still going to make the announcement. So because we want to take this conversation forward and we want to action it, we don't just want to talk about it. And I think for me, you are actually living the talk, because now you travel around Africa to do business. We want people to begin to have that mentality that Africa is the market, whereby you can be able to, travel around and do businesses and really, empower other people as well as to go along. We are still going to come back to you, but something is happening at the background here. We are being inundated with questions. It's amazing how it generated a lot of interest. I tell you, we are not going to be able to take all the questions. What we are going to do, we are going to take a few, then we are going to email some of those questions to AfreximBank, and the ones that are meant for Sakile, we email to you also, and then we get feedback for our audience. The questions are just so many, and they are popping up. Thank you so much, audience, for being participatory enough to ask those questions. So can we have some questions, Christoph?
Yeah, I just want to see if we can, if we can get her back on. Ask for start a video.
Yeah,
there we are.
Okay.
So yeah, we've got some very interesting questions. Both Sakile and Ms. Kanayo can contribute from their different perspectives. The one from the institutional side and the one from the life of an entrepreneur. Let's start with Patricia's question. Patricia is asking, wasn't sure whether it's missed it or not, but the actual lending, access to finance, so I suppose that's directed at the bank, sort of for small businesses, that is perhaps below 75,000, not big tickets, sort of below 75 US dollars. Is that something that the bank does, or where could they be directed to for such finance, where it comes to going into other territories, sort of finance to help businesses to go into other African territories?
Yeah.
My understanding of the question is that can we do transactions of $75,000?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, no. It's probably too low for us in the sense that we're a wholesale bank, but we have avenues how we can support those kind of facilities, and that's we have schemes where we support lending to what we call trade finance intermediaries, and those trade finance intermediaries in various countries are commercial banks and factoring companies. So we lend to them on lend to the smaller size customers. If you can imagine the number of 75,000 deals that will come out of the whole of Africa, no one institution can deal with that. So we use what we call our trade finance intermediaries, which are usually commercial banks. If I know your country, I can direct you to some of those, or factoring companies, such that they can support you. We also lend to not just commercial banks, but also other development financial institutions in various countries. So we give them lines of credit for them to on-lend.
Oh, great. Okay. Any question again?
No, I'm not sure if there's a follow-up maybe on that. So, I mean, this whole thing of financing of cross-trade. So, by what size deal? So we talk about more significant deals, So I'm not sure, Sakile, you're kind of exposed to a lot of entrepreneurs that are looking for finance that want to go into other countries. Yourself being a case, So what is your experience there in terms of getting access to such support? Sakile?
Yeah, so I think it's all about, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So for me, it's all about, sure. For me, it's all about strategy of how to raise finance, right? So what I've learned is a lot of entrepreneurs, it's all guesswork and hoping that you can raise. There's no plan on how you raise. And so when we built our company, there was always a plan of what direction we were going to take, who are the potential acquirers in the space. And so we understood our space pretty well. And so when we did our marketing, we knew which people to go to in terms of raising investment and how to attract the big people in terms of raising investment. But what you have a lot in the entrepreneurship space with young entrepreneurs like myself, who are trying to scale in other parts of the continent, is lack of context, right? So they operate within a space, but they don't know who could potentially finance their business. And so they'll probably run around maybe to 50 VCs or banks who are not really interested in financing them. And what I've learned is in this space that we are in, you're more likely to get funding from a big institution or a corporate like MTN than you would get from a VC firm, because VC firms that are operating in Africa have a clear mandate of what type of startup they're looking for. But again, if you then align your objectives as a company, like I align my objective with some big corporates on the continent, I was then able to raise capital from them, and basically through convertible notes or through equity and stuff like that. So the most important thing is what I've learned is you need to understand your space. You need to understand which potential lenders exist within your space, and then align with those lenders. Because this is the biggest problem. Like the information gap is the biggest problem. Most people don't have access or awareness to information that could basically get them access to financing.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of financing going around, essentially.
Yeah. Thank you, Sakile. Yeah, I'd like to put another question. That's very, very succinct enough. Before we take maybe one or two more questions, I'd like to put a question to Mr. Kanayo, Awani, that now if you say that $75,000 is actually is far, far too small. So someone wants to know how much is the minimum?
Yes, our minimum is, it depends on the country. In countries like, small countries like Liberia, Niger, I'm able to do like $2 million. But in bigger economies, we sometimes like in Nigeria, where, our minimum will be like $1 million. But in the this is normally, but in the factoring space, we do go down to $1 million, generally speaking.
Okay, cool.
Great. Zianda had an interesting question along with some others, including, I hope I pronounced your name correct, Yale, I think. And there's Zianda is now online, So Zianda, you asked about the info gap. This question was more specifically about exporting leather goods and finding information about how to do that. So maybe Zianda, if you want to phrase your question for us, what do you refer to in terms of the info gap, and what is the kind of information that you would be looking for to get? No, she got scared.
Sianda, introduce yourself first, please.
No, she's gone now. So, but in any case, the question is about. You spoke earlier about the info gap and what are the practical steps, So maybe I can direct it to both of our guests.
Okay.
That entrepreneurs can take in terms of getting information that is current, that is useful, and that they can then use in terms of expanding their businesses into other territories. So the fair is coming up, and maybe there's some things around the fair that we can take note of. So by the way, there was also a question about the fair. Maybe we can ask Idoro asked how to participate in the virtual fair. So access to information and how the virtual fair is going to be able to
live streaming of the events.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So maybe Ms. Kanayo can go first, and then Sakile, if you can also comment about that, in terms of access to information and how entrepreneurs can go about.
No, you mean how to access the virtual trade fair?
I think there are two levels to the question. The one is in general, if entrepreneurs are looking at inter-country, if they want to go into other countries, where to look for information, and then more specifically when it comes to the fair, how that virtual, how they can access the virtual fair.
Okay, so the trade fair is to enable us build trade information. So we have a trade information unit, which is developing a portal where we will store trade information, trade and market information. So the way to do it is to ask us if you have any specific question. What information are you looking for? What markets are you looking to? What sector do you want information upon? What country do you want their rules of trade? It has to be very specific. The other one is that the virtual trade fair information is on our website. If you want to know more about how to get onto it, please feel free to go to our website. Otherwise, you can also send me an email, kawani@AfreximBank.com. Awani@AfreximBank.com. So if you send me any information, I'll direct you appropriately.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah, Sakile, want to throw light?
Sure. And so I consult for a lot of big businesses, and information is the biggest problem, right? So one of the jobs my small consultancy does is clearly this, is how do we get access to information? And most of the time is you find yourself developing this information from the ground up. And this is the biggest problem because this costs a lot of money. And I think that's why a lot of entrepreneurs are not competitive on the African continent, is because information on the development of information is expensive. And for example, one of my companies, which is Kisima Audio Insights, is the data or music consumption data company for Africa. And we are developing data and the usage of music or consumption data for the African continent. And this has not been around for, I don't know, the music industry has been around for how long. So we've had to basically go down and start building the engines to be able to collect this data from across multiple countries on the continent. And now we've gotten to a point where we can now become an advisory to the music industry, not just in Africa, but across the world. But the biggest problem is it's taking us about $50,000 in investment to be able to build this engine and get to the point where we are. And so the problem is, this is the biggest problem, that to develop or get access to good quality data is very, very expensive. But what I would advise young entrepreneurs to do is do it yourself, right? So start small, like the lady said, there is start asking the right specific questions, and in questions within your context, right? Because not all data is relevant, but data is relevant within the context within which you operate, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much. We're trying to wrap up now, and I just want to, before I make the announcement, I just want to ask Ms. Kanayo this question. Now, about the new policy around the free trade, Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. How is that going to impact on the businesses that Afrexim is doing on the continent? And how is that ultimately going to translate to actually helping small businesses? If you can just answer us like in 1 minute, that would be good.
No, the African Continental Free Trade Area is an enabler of intra-African trade, in a sense. It's because it's an arrangement which ultimately goes on into a custom union. You know, you can imagine an European Union. That's the ultimate goal, where goods, services, and people and labor can move across the borders with ease. You know, that's the EU is the well, I say the model of integration. Although we are talking about Brexit now, but you can see that the development of the EU is closely linked to deeper integration. You know, and the African continent is 1.2 billion people. You know, gross GDP of over 2.5 trillion. You can just put that in perspective. You know, covering 55 states of the African Union. It's a huge market, and I'm hoping that Africans recognize it, because non-Africans do. You know, so it's just an enabler of a deeper African integration. Mr. Sudo talked about air links. One of the initiatives under the is the single air transport market. You know, single airspace, such that every African country becomes a hub of any airline. So if you're traveling Ethiopian Airways and you're in Nigeria or you're in Ghana, you don't have to go back to Addis Ababa to continue on to Mauritania.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, and if it can be implemented, it's a huge initiative. So it's all to facilitate the, you know, the deeper integration and hopefully to the growth in trade and development of the continent.
Wow, thank you so much. You know, someone was asking me a question. I think I must actually say, are you going to bring back the madam to come and talk to us more about this thing? I think people really enjoyed this presentation, and what I can say is that we would really love to have you in one of our conferences, if possible, in all the 4 conference locations for 2019. I'm going to send you the timetable, and to have Afrexim actually come and engage with people physically. That is the whole essence of why we're having the UAM 2019 conference that is happening in Lagos, is happening in Maputo, is happening in Cape Town, and is happening in Dar es Salaam. And people can go on our website. You see the website is just, you know, on the screen now, www.unlockingafricamarkets.africa. We have the 4 locations there. You can just express your interest to attend, and then we'll get in touch with you with more details about the conference. And I think before a note of thanks, what I want to do is that I just want also our people to know that our webinar will now be a monthly series. We are taking next month off for obvious reasons because of the holiday. In January, again, we resume with another kind of a conference that the discussion that engages on Africa and how we can collectively, move the continent forward. So I just want to appreciate our panelists, and just also appreciate them for actually making time, and especially to really appreciate and again congratulate Ms. Kanayo for the Intra-African Trade Fair. We are all rooting for you guys. We are rooting for you and your team. We are saying go, and we wish you well, and we'll keep in touch, and then we'll keep the conversation going. I think that's the whole essence, for us to actually keep the conversation going and make sure that we encourage as many people who want to be involved to really get closer. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so but before we wrap up, we do have a few more minutes. So if I can ask, we've got Zianda now in the room too.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask her to, what is it that you take away from spending the close to an hour here today on the call? And then maybe we can go to Sakile and Ms. Kanayo also to ask, what is it that we can take away from the discussion here today, in your opinion? One or two points that it is that we can take away from the discussion here today.
Okay.
But we can start with Zianda.
Introduce yourself briefly from Basile. Okay.
Can you speak, Zianda?
Can you speak? Hello? Speak. Okay.
Yeah, no. Maybe I can speak because I'm not.
Okay, no, let's go to.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, continue.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. So being strategic in terms of finding finances for your business, and I think that's something that I'm taking away. Know who to associate yourself with, who can be willing to fund your business, and all of that. That for me was a takeaway point. And I like what Ms. Kanayo has talked about the intra-African trade and the whole value chain, focusing on that. And I think it goes together with the conference of Unlocking African Markets 2019. So definitely, it feels like we're on the right track. We are having the right conversation in terms of lifting.
Great. Thank you.
So thanks. Your internet seems to be a bit slow, so we can't hear the rest of it. But
Sakile.
Maybe we can move on to Sakile and then to wrap up.
Yeah.
Sakile?
Yeah.
Sakile,
yeah, so my key takeaway. Yes. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
So okay, cool. The key takeaway that I take away from this is that there's a lot of players acting or working for the betterment of Africa in different spaces, right? So, and I think it's great that the conversation is happening, for example, from where the bank or larger institution down to where the H-Web operates in terms of grassroots. And I think it's just about connecting the dots now, seeing if we could both help each other. We can facilitate certain things that they do. They can facilitate certain things that we do in terms of going forward and growing, and just keep the conversation growing, because it seems like a lot of Africans and people who are not of African descent are interested in the continent. And how do we benefit first as Africans before we open up the continent to everybody else?
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Sakile. Okay, Ms. Kanayo.
Okay, just to say, and I'm going to rush it pretty quickly, is that the trade fair is not an end in itself. Our initiatives are mind-boggling. It's not just about the trade fair. The trade fair is just the beginning of many things to come. It's just one of our initiatives that we're implementing. So I take on your invitation that when you want us to participate in your conversations, so do send us your program ahead of time. We'd love to continue to tell people about what we're doing to prove in this space. But also, I would like to finally invite the people who are out there to the trade fair, because one of the things I couldn't have time to talk about is that we have a huge segment on the creative economy. the creative economy is probably one of Africa's biggest exports. So we're going to have a creative Africa exchange. And this is for your attention also, Mr. Zulu, where we want to begin to talk about content of the African creative industry, film, music. We're also talking about, we're going to have fashion shows. DJ Drogba himself, who is a football ace that's gone into business, is going to be on site. You know, we have Dibanch, we have Jackie Mosepe, we have Egyptian, you know, we're going to have, because the entertainment industry is actually one of Africa's biggest intra-African trade and services, trade in goods and services. So please come, join us. Thank you.
Yeah, wow. Thank you so much. The final word from us is just that we will try as much as possible also to circulate this information. One of the things we do is to upload this, the recorded version also on our website and YouTube so that people can listen again. There are quite a lot to learn from this conversation today. Thank you so much. We are closing the meeting now. We appreciate you so much. And for the audience, we look forward to also another series in January in the new year 2019. Thank you. Have a wonderful weekend. Sharp.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.